Wir kommen nun zur Erklärung des Präsidenten der Parlamentarischen Versammlung des Europarates, Theodoros Rousopoulos, gemäß § 19a der Geschäftsordnung des Nationalrates. Ich darf Sie sehr herzlich begrüßen, Herr Präsident, in unserem Parlament. Ich bedanke mich für Ihr Kommen. Ihre Erklärung samt der anschließenden Debatte wird auch live im Fernsehen übertragen werden. Ich darf Sie nun, Herr Präsident, um Ihre Ausführungen bitten.
Dear President Sobotka, dear fellow parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, please let me express my sincere gratitude for this invitation to address you, distinguished members of the National Council of Austria, in my capacity of President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Entering your iconic Parliament building, I had the impression of entering ancient Greece. Firstly, because I was entering the temple of democracy, and secondly, because this building was inspired by the classical era. Theophilus Hansen, who left Denmark and went with his brother to Athens, created many iconic buildings in the Greek capital, such as the Public Library and the Academy of Athens. Soon afterwards, he came to Vienna as a guest of Francis Joseph and created the best works of his career. The building where I have the honor to stand and address you today is one of them. I know that it is rare for foreign guests to address your parliament, and I greatly appreciate this honor. It is, to my mind, confirmation of the unwavering commitment of Austria to the values and principles of the Council of Europe, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Honorable President and distinguished members of the Austrian Parliament, events in Europe and beyond, unfortunately, demonstrate that these values, which are the cornerstone of our European identity, are by no means won forever. They need our determination, our collective wisdom and courage, and our solidarity. And that is why this invitation is so important to me. The Assembly which I represent today provides a unique platform at the European level for interparliamentary dialogue and parliamentary diplomacy, bringing together 612 parliamentarians from 46 member states and even more member of parliaments which enjoy observer and partner for democracy status. Parliamentarians who represent the whole spectrum of political life, ruling and opposition parties, left, right, and center. Austria has always been and remains a key partner to the Parliamentary Assembly since its accession on 16 April 1956. I see many of your representatives here today. The leader of the Austrian delegation to PACE, my good friend Reinhold Lopatka, who brings his wisdom and authority to our Assembly. Petra Bayer, who works tirelessly as the current chair of the Committee on the Election of Judges to the European Court of Human Rights and as an extremely active and engaged member of the Equality Committee. Stefan Senach, whose experience and determination in election observation missions and PACE monitoring has been tremendously valuable on many occasions. Andrea Eder-Gitzhaler, who is currently working in particular on raising awareness on the need to combat discrimination against older people. Stephanie Crisper, who as a member of our Migration Committee is looking at the human rights situation at some of the most fragile European border points. Martin Graf, Vice President of the Conservative Group. I would like to mention all Austrian members of our Assembly: former Speaker Doris Bures, Christian Buchmann, Franz Leonard Essl, Carmen Geithler-Tincelli, Axel Kassinger, Anja Sirka-Prammer. I pay tribute to you all, and I thank you for your work at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Dear colleagues, Austria also gave us two great and very successful presidents of the Assembly, Peter Sider and Karl Czernetz, as well as the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Walter Zwima. former member of our assembly. We still remember them in Strasbourg. So the Austrian parliament can be proud of how it is represented in Strasbourg, and your members have served as examples of political wisdom, responsibility, and integrity for other delegations. This year, dear colleagues, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Council of Europe. The organization was created in the aftermath of the Second World War as a unique peace project with a clear goal: to prevent a new war in Europe. European countries agreed to collectively build democracy, security, on the base of every member state's commitment to the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. Half a century later, after the end of the Cold War, this project finally brought all of Europe together. Despite the challenges and clear setbacks facing us today, we should not forget this. We can be proud to say that this dream of the political titans of the post-Second World War period has been and still is a success story. The values which the Council of Europe embodies remain our compass and part of our European DNA. They are part of the fabric of our political, social, and cultural life. They remain as relevant as ever, and I am convinced that these values are the only way to navigate through the roots and the rough seas and storms of this 21st century. For the full-scale aggression launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine on 24 February 2022 was nothing less than an attack and existential challenge to this peace project and to these shared values. Our organization was the first and so far the only international body to take the decision to expel the Russian Federation as an immediate and direct consequence of this war. In so doing, we stood up not only for our member state, Ukraine, but for all of our member states and for the citizens of Europe and even beyond, who count on the international community to uphold the democratic stability of their institutions and societies. Let us not forget that this blatant aggression by the Russian Federation is not the only attack on our values and institutions. Across Europe, we are witnessing growing signs of democratic backsliding, which should serve as an alarm call. These signs are characterized by the gradual erosion of fundamental freedoms, such as the freedom of expression, a weakening of checks and balances, the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, and overt or covert attempts to silence any dissenting voices, including those of the media or political opposition. Our citizens are increasingly turning away from political engagement, losing trust in their institutions and in their representatives, and this should concern us. Allow me to explain my own view. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been in the public sphere of my country since 1981. I have personally participated as a journalist, as a member of parliament, as a minister of state, as a university professor, in important historical moments of our time, which have filled me with experience, hope, and in many cases, disappointment. When I witnessed the US-Soviet Union arms reduction agreements, I breathed, like all my contemporaries, the oxygen of mutual understanding. Later, I met Mikhail Gorbachev in the Kremlin. I met the man who could change and would change the course of history and was captivated by his vision. When I saw the Berlin Wall coming down before my eyes and heard the architect of the unification of Germany, Helmut Kohl, describe the difficulties he had faced in his determination to end the division of his country, I was filled with hope for a better tomorrow. When I met Margaret Thatcher in Paris with François Mitterrand and George Bush Sr. talking about peace in the world, I believed that the divisions had finally come to an end. I will dwell a little more on this. It was 34 years ago, just 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, on the 21st of November 1990, the leaders of all the countries of Europe, East and West, the United States and Canada, met for the first time in Paris as representatives of countries with freedom as their common denominator, democracy, commitment to the principles of good neighborliness, respect for the inviolability of borders, and the sovereignty of states, commitment to peaceful statements of disputes and cooperation, commitment, commitment, commitment. The 34 leaders of the then Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe signed the Paris Charter for a New Europe, a document that we smugly called historic at that time. When I talked to Nelson Mandela, the leader who proved that patience and perseverance is the goal of equality, is the only way to a better world, I believed again in the vision of democracy. But a period of renewed tensions followed. A war in Yugoslavia, new tensions in the Balkans, ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, an Arab Spring that was not spring after all, but a new winter that brought to Europe, along with other conflict around us, new migratory flows and millions of refugees seeking either for asylum or for a better life. But along with it came the waves of reaction to the migrants. Along came also the traffickers, the modern slave traders, to whom we will not grant the right to replace the legal mechanism of immigration that we must all follow, without losing our humanity, but also without turning a blind eye to the tragedies caused by wars, poverty, and the climate crisis. Dear colleagues, my PhD is about the ethnic identity of the Greeks in Venice in the 17th century. Having dealt with issues of particularities, culture, and national identity, I perfectly understand the concerns that exist in many parts of Europe about the alternation of national identities. Yet, we know that historically, our world was built on constant movements of populations, both in Europe and the United States. Without ignoring the newly raised problems, we must all work together in the framework of common understanding in order to find mutually beneficial solutions, both for those who are looking for better opportunities for their lives and for those who worry sometimes justifiably, sometimes excessively. We have faced other divisions, even in our European family, reinforced by the financial crisis of 2008, which left a deep wound of division and created troubled citizens around the vision of a united Europe. But we would be unworthy descendants of great political leaders if we did not try again and again. Frustration is inherent in effort, but lack of effort leads to what the ancient Greeks called idiocy. The English word idiot has its root in the ancient word idiotis, meaning private person, and describing those who in ancient Athenian democracy were not interested in the common good and did not participate in the decisions of the agora and the public affairs. We have to participate, and we must continue this effort, an effort that led us last year to the 4th summit of the history of the Council of Europe in Reykjavik. At this summit, our leaders, including your President, Alexander van der Bellen, stood together in reasserting their will to support our principles of democracy and to, as long it is necessary, support and find sustainable answers to the threat of democratic stability and peace in our European continent. At the Reykjavik summit, the heads of states and government did not ignore the call from the Parliamentary Assembly to set up a comprehensive accountability system as quickly as possible and to ensure that all the crimes committed by Russia are properly investigated, prosecuted, and punished, and that justice is indeed done. Dear colleagues, the very first accountability mechanism for the consequences of the Russian aggression, a registry of damage, was launched at the summit, and today it is fully operational and already receiving individual claims. The Assembly is also active in supporting every effort to bring back the children of Ukraine, particularly those who have been deported or displaced to the Russian Federation, Belarus, and occupied territories. Amidst all this horror, we are looking towards the future recovery and rebuilding of Ukraine, and I invite you to examine the very solid and rich reports we have been working on over the last 2 years, which detail all this. I am, of course, thinking about the emerging new generation of human rights in such areas as climate change and environmental protection, and the exponential growth of the use of artificial intelligence in all spheres of life. Our Assembly is often the trailblazer in the Council of Europe in calling for new thinking on human rights issues, adapting our legal framework if necessary, and putting in place multilateral cooperation mechanisms to work together to find the best ways forward. Addressing the issues raised by the swift proliferation of artificial intelligence is a priority close to my heart for my presidency. It is a dazzling new world, and I'm among those who believe that even if there are serious reservations, or perhaps because there are many concerns, we should actively engage in reflecting upon its impact on our daily lives, on our democratic experiences, and on how to regulate it so that its huge potential can be used at its best and not that we are used by it. 100 years ago, Alexis de Tocqueville, following what I told you earlier about the ancient Athenian agora and those who preferred to abstain from their obligations to democracy, identified the loss of interest in public sphere, the withdrawal into one's private sphere, as a major threat to democracy. Today, this withdrawal can be exacerbated by social networks and algorithms that create cleavages among people who end up interacting with only those who think alike. Such fragmentation may lead to radicalization. It may ultimately lead to conflicts and wars. In short, we have to strike the right balance between mitigating the risks and making full use of the advantages of AI can offer us. And I believe that one of the first steps is to open up the discussion, including all parties, including public and private sectors, civil society and citizens, and to set together the rules of the game. I'm very pleased that the Committee of Ministers responded to the Assembly's call to draft a legally binding document on artificial intelligence and human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. I hope that Austria, along with other member states, will accede to this convention as soon as it is opened for signature, enabling its entry into force and its development in practice. In concluding, I would like to add a few words about my own experience. Since becoming a member of the Parliamentary Assembly, chair of its Immigration Committee, and now its president, the Council of Europe, dear colleagues, is a relatively small organization compared to some on the international stage. Certainly, its budget is tiny compared to that of some other European institutions. And yet, I do believe that the Council of Europe punches above its weight in the fields in which it has a unique mandate, expertise, moral authority, and a certain agility and flexibility of action. which others might lack. I'm convinced that the Council of Europe has a clear role and purpose in today's international landscape, and that it is capable of reacting to new challenges and of taking proactive steps in previously unknown territory. This capacity and agility rests strongly in our multilateral foundation on trust and cooperation with and between national governments and national parliaments. I understand that there are strong reservations. Of course, it is not possible for us all to agree. And of course, we should not all agree. Because if that was the case, then this would not be a good sign for the quality of our democracy. I will listen with great interest the views expressed here today. And throughout my tenure as the President of the Assembly of the Council of Europe, I will listen. My goal, dear colleagues, is to be able to put into practice what, in my opinion, distinguishes real leaders from populist ones. Leaders are those who move into the future ready to question their own actions and improve themselves and their policies along the way. Those who blindly follow the crowd are just populists. Democracy tolerates all voices. History singles out only those who change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your comment and your explanation.